People who hired a personal investigator. What secret did you uncover? I'm a former PI and caught some dude's wife doing the dirty with her brother. I was a private investigator for 6 years, mostly handling domestic cases and a bit of insurance work. The craziest case I ever worked on was in Huntsville, Alabama. An upper-middle-class client from a nice home called us in for a meeting. He'd found some troubling emails in his wife's outbox, and he didn't recognize the recipient. After some digging, it looked like the recipient was using a throwaway email. One of the emails contained flight information for Huntsville International Airport, along with pickup instructions. So, we went out and set up surveillance at the 10-minute pickup area. Sure enough, the wife came out, followed by a male suspect. The guy jumped into the driver's seat, and the wife started giving him blowy as they left the airport. They didn't get far before they pulled into a FedEx Hub parking lot and started banging. I parked my car behind a building and crawled on my belly with my camera, but it was too dark to capture anything clear. I got closer, within 6 feet of the car, and could only get audio. Then, the door opened right in front of me. The dome light came on, and I was able to see everything in vivid detail. There was some seriously disturbing behavior happening. The male suspect stood up with his back to me, and the wife continued to give him blowy on him in the doorway. I managed to get some of the clearest, most detailed shots of my career. I gathered the evidence and called the client to arrange a meeting. When I showed him the footage, he was completely shocked. He recognized the suspect. It turned out that the man wasn't just some random guy, he was her brother. In the end, the client got full custody of the kids in the divorce. I left the PI business after that. Now I work as a fisherman. Being a private investigator is a dirty business, and I'm done with it. Before we continue, do us a quick favor. Smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. When I was 10, my parents separated and went through a nasty divorce. Sometime during all of that, he hired a private investigator to follow my mom around. The investigator concluded that my mother was a cash-only companion. She did such service and hung around doctors' conventions. The investigator took photos and logged everything. My dad snuck into the house my mother and I lived in with a camcorder and recorded the discovery of a ledger documenting all of her clients and the money exchange. He leveraged it in the divorce, so he didn't get bent over entirely. My dad didn't tell me any of this until I was 17 or so. I didn't believe it until I thought back and remembered some things. She had a pager, and back in the 90s, only a few types of people had pagers, doctors and cash-only companions. She would suddenly be gone late at night if I woke up. She would always say she was out grocery shopping. I also remember walking in on her, wearing a revealing dress made of leather. No more revealing than what girls wear to the club, but hey, that crap is weird when it's your mom and you are 10. Anywho, my dad still throws it at me when he wants to prove how much better of a person he is than my mother or my stepdad, who married a cash-only companion. In her defense, she was paying her way to become an RN, which she is now. Story 3. My wife hired one. She found that she was wasting money and that I'm a very boring person. We came from different cultures, but we knew we wanted to be with each other. She's Hispanic, born in another country, and I'm a hillbilly from Appalachia. There was a lot of jealousy early on both sides because we simply couldn't relate. After a while, I grew tired of being suspicious and told her that if she wanted to be with someone else to just tell me, and I'll move on, but just tell me. It was very freeing for me. I guessed to her, though it only made her more suspicious. I got off work at 7 a.m., and there wasn't much to do, and not many places that were open for a couple more hours, so I would go to the gym. She worked an early first shift job, so we didn't see each other in the mornings. And I guess she didn't like not being able to account for the gap between me leaving work and me coming back to the apartment. The guy she hired to follow me around was terrible. I had my routine: get off work, go to the gym, go grab some breakfast, hit up Blockbuster, maybe go to a pet store. We had birds and fish. At that time in the morning, these places are empty. Like I said, I'm a boring person. A few days later, I leave the gym and the new guy behind, heading to a restaurant, only for him to walk in shortly after. Creepy. I finish my meal and leave, go to Blockbuster, and sure enough, he shows up again. At this point, I'm definitely suspicious. The next day at the gym, I tell my buddy about how weird it was that this guy kept appearing everywhere I went, and he agrees it's unsettling. After my workout, I tell my friend that I'm heading to a specific pet store and that if the guy leaves right after me, He should follow me there. Sure enough, that's exactly what happens. I walk into the store, and within minutes, the guy follows. A moment later, my buddy walks in too. We end up pinning the guy to the floor, and I demand to know what's going on. He stammers that it's just a job, and that he ain't seen nothing. We let him go with a firm warning not to show up at the gym again. When I get home, I call her up and tell her she hired the biggest idiot around and that she needs to stop wasting her money. She asks what happened, and I simply tell her to ask him, since she's the one paying him. Her jealousy died down after that. Well, that and I made the ultimate quote to her that made sense. I said, "If I was getting laid as much as you think I am, wouldn't I be a lot happier?" And that was that. For those folks hoping for a different ending, sorry to disappoint. We've been together for almost a quarter of a century, and everything is fine. Maybe she just couldn't believe that she was involved with someone so boring. Story 4. My uncle once hired a private investigator to follow his wife after he started noticing signs of an affair. She was the principal of a school and would always claim she had to work long hours or attend every school event, often disappearing for extended periods or going on business trips. It raised suspicions, and it turned out she was indeed having an affair with the vice principal. The PI gathered evidence, including camera footage of the two of them sneaking into her house during lunch breaks for a quick rendezvous on my uncle's bed. There was more footage, too, showing them meeting up on multiple occasions. While it was never officially confirmed, some kids at the school later hinted that they had been intimate in the vice principal's office as well. When the affair came to light, other family members started putting the pieces together. They recalled how my aunt would drop off her daughter at random times, sometimes on odd nights, claiming she had a sudden school function and needed a babysitter. It also became clear why she had surprised my uncle with a breast augmentation surgery. Turns out, it was a gift for the vice principal, not for him. Story 5. Well, I hired a private investigator and found out that they are pretty damn expensive. Story 6. I was very surprised at this one. I went and retrieved my 25-year-old girlfriend from her conservative, religious Middle Eastern family. In their culture, women are not treated as adults with their own freedoms. They have the freedom of a child until they are married off. I would never have been accepted by her father, due to my Christian white American upbringing. When she was in the country, I hopped on a plane, got her, and brought her home with me. I was already working out the paperwork needed to marry her and let her stay in the country legally, but had not yet filed anything. She never discussed me with them, and they did not have even the slightest clue where she went, or if there was someone else involved helping her. They only knew that she left. Her father hired a private investigator to track her down. Within 2 days of her getting on the plane with me, her aunt and uncle, siblings, not spouses, were at my door. One lived on the opposite side of the country from me, and the other had just flown in from Dubai. They had logs of all our IM conversations, every one of her different IM names, and a lot of information about me and my family. Sigh. She's back out of the country now. I keep hoping I'll get the chance to see her again. Story 7. About 10 years ago, my mom, who was an attorney specializing in workers' compensation cases, had a case involving a woman, let's call her Jane, who was injured while deployed in Afghanistan. Jane was severely hurt and bedridden, but the other side wasn't buying it. They hired a private investigator and came to court armed with what they thought was a game-changing video. Footage of Jane mowing her lawn, unloading groceries, and going about her daily life. Their smoking gun. Feeling confident, they played the video in court, convinced they had exposed Jane as a fraud. Then came the moment my mom's client dropped the bombshell. The woman in the video. Not Jane. It was her twin sister, who had moved in to take care of Jane after the accident. Jane's lawyers presented proof that she was, in fact, bedridden and unable to work. The judge ruled in her favor, granting her full benefits. As for the opposing attorneys, my mom swears their faces were a mixture of pure disbelief and regret. Pretty much every lawyer's dream scenario. Story 8. I'm not a PI, but I have a story. I'm a PC repair tech and the computer guy for my circle of friends. A relative of a friend of mine reached out one day asking if I could help locate his brother. The guy had vanished from town without a trace, leaving behind his wife and 2 small kids. They were living together, not separated, and he took nothing more than the clothes on his back. No one knew if he was in trouble, running from someone, or just being a deadbeat. He handed me his brother's old desktop PC, an XP machine, which was pretty easy to crack. Unfortunately, the browser history was wiped clean, the documents folder was empty, and the system seemed almost completely blank. But I did find something interesting: an installation of World of Warcraft. Inside the game files, I struck gold. In the screenshots folder, there were a bunch of images showing his character, a dwarf, interacting with a female night elf. They were chatting and sending each other flirty emotes. Pretty clear signs that he'd abandoned his family for some online relationship. One of the WoW add-ons he had was Prat, a chat tool that saves a buffer of all in-game conversations. I was able to locate that buffer file and find the last conversation he'd had with the night elf before he disappeared. She'd given him an address about 800 miles away. With a quick search on Google, I found her name, a phone number, and even a satellite image of her house with her car parked in the driveway. When I gave the family his exact location, they were shocked. His brother immediately called the number on his cell phone, and sure enough, the guy picked up. You could tell he was probably in disbelief at hearing from him after all this time. As far as I know, he never came back home, but I'd like to think my little detective work helped ensure the kids got their child support. Story 9. This will probably get buried, but here's a story. My grandmother hired a private investigator to follow my grandfather because she suspected he was having an affair after almost 10 years of marriage. He had been mysteriously disappearing on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The PI reported back to her, saying, "I don't know what you're worried about, he's just going to church." Turns out, he had been secretly taking classes to convert to Catholicism as a surprise for their 10th anniversary. Story 10. I'm not a hacker. Social hacking, manipulating or influencing people, is not the same as computer hacking. I keep getting asked to teach people, but honestly, all the information you need is out there on Google. And just to be clear, I wasn't a certified PI. I was just some guy online who was asked to help find someone's wife. I wasn't advertising this. The guy had seen a log from one of my past targets and wanted to know if I could assist. That's the whole story. I've shared this before, but it's likely to get buried again. Anyway, here it goes. Back in high school, I did some digital PI work. In other words, I did a bit of social hacking and got pretty good at digging up information. One day, I randomly received a message from an ex-Marine who asked for my help in finding his wife. Here's the backstory. His wife had left him, taking their daughter with her. She was supposedly staying with her parents, but he was worried because she had gotten involved with some unsavory people. And not just any people, but literally bad people. He was concerned for their daughter's safety, but didn't want to get the police involved just yet. He gave me her details, and I started my search. He told me the address where she was supposed to be, and yes, I got her IP from that address. Important detail. I Googled her name and used a couple of custom DOXers my friends had put together. What I found was unexpected. She had some very unconventional interests in bedroom activities. She had a particular fascination with horses. I tracked down her equestrian profile, found a guy who was always commenting on her page, and traced him. Surprise, surprise, he owned a horse ranch about an hour from where the ex-Marine lived. I decided to try and confirm her location. I spoofed a bank email and asked her to reply. No personal info, just needed to verify it was her email linked to the bank. When she responded, I checked the email header and found her IP address. I used an IP trace tool, and when she clicked the link, I got her connected location. It was about 8 minutes from the horse ranch. It turns out she was replying from the guy's house, and based on everything I pieced together, she was likely staying there with her daughter, probably engaging in the very activities the ex-Marine was worried about. I sent all the evidence I found to him. He had offered me a couple $1,000s for my work, but I only took a couple hundred. I told him to save the rest for a vacation with his daughter. A few months later, he reached out to thank me. He had gone through with the divorce and got custody of his daughter. I believe they went on a vacation to Florida. A few of his ex-Marine buddies messaged me after that, asking for help too, but by then, I had already stepped away from the hacking world after a close call. And that's it. Story 11. This happened many years ago. Our daughter ran away from home when she was just a teenager. We had a sinking feeling that something was wrong. She suddenly stopped talking to us, started wearing a lot more makeup, something she never did before. My wife also noticed that clothes would slowly disappear from our daughter's drawers and closet. In hindsight, we should have seen the signs. They were all there. Then one day, she just disappeared. We had no clue where she went, but we suspected California. After all, That's where so many dissatisfied farm girls end up. We hired a private investigator to track her down, hoping to convince her to come back to Minnesota. It took him years to get any solid leads. California is a huge state, and we weren't even 100% sure that's where she ended up. Slowly, the details started trickling in. She was in Los Angeles, she had given herself a new name, and was living as a trophy wife for some millionaire. That one really cracked us up. The PI was getting closer to finding solid answers. Then one day, he called us and said someone else was on the case. We were shocked, to say the least. Who else could possibly be looking for our daughter? Outside of a few family members and friends in our town, no one knew we had even hired anyone. The investigator kept referring to the other person as a dude. And honestly, that's just how he sounded. He was impressed with the dude's work, saying he was playing everyone, working both sides, sneaking around, really underhanded stuff. To us, he just sounded like some deadbeat in a bathrobe. After that, the investigator sort of gave up. This was about 20, maybe 25 years ago. I thought we were so close to finding our daughter, but I guess she just wanted to be done with us. Well, you know how it goes. Sometimes you catch the bear, and sometimes the bear catches you. Story 12. This didn't happen to me, but a friend of mine had a boyfriend who came from a pretty broken home. His mother had divorced his biological father, and the stepfather, who was extremely conservative and religious, promised that when the son turned 12, he would send him to a group home. Years later, this same stepfather started occasionally lay hands on the mother, so she hired a private investigator to gather more information about him. The PI followed him around and eventually uncovered a shocking secret. On certain nights, this religious, super conservative man would dress up in his alter female ego and do drag, and had essentially an entirely different life that his family at home knew nothing about. Story 13. I worked as a private investigator in a European country during the late 90s. One case I handled involved a client who wanted to find his wife after she had left him and disappeared. After tracking her down in a small town in Spain, I discovered that she was hiding from him because he was involved with a fraudulent group. She feared for her life, knowing he would likely harm her if he found out where she was, as she was aware of most of their illegal schemes. I offered her some advice and returned to my home country. I told the client that it had been difficult to locate her and gave him false evidence suggesting she had fled to Brazil. However, I continued to investigate him and uncovered that his group had been using money from credit card fraud to buy equipment for printing counterfeit money. I reported my findings to the police, who raided the group and arrested 6 members. They seized over $4 million in fake currency, both domestic and foreign. Story 14. This isn't about me, but a close friend of mine. She hired a private investigator to track down her birth mother. When she found her, it turned out her birth mother was involved in drugs and other unsavory activities. My friend wasn't exactly a role model herself, but her issues were more personality-related than anything to do with substances. In my less compassionate moments, I wonder if her mother's drug use while pregnant had something to do with it. The investigation also revealed that she had a half-brother who turned out to be a really nice guy and is doing well in life. They've kept in touch since. However, not long after, my friend hit a rough patch and decided she wanted to move in with her biological mom to build a relationship. Things quickly took a dark turn when her bio mom's live-in boyfriend, who might have been a pimp, allegedly essayed her. To complicate things, her bio mom found out and physically attacked her. I say allegedly because my friend has a history of lying. She's known to embellish the truth a lot. And considering her past behavior, she might have consented and later cried essay when her mom found out. Regardless of what really happened, nobody was arrested, and they cut ties completely. They're not even friends on Facebook anymore. As a parting gift, my friend stole her mom's cat when she left. This whole drama unfolded in about 2 months, and honestly, it was just a whirlwind of chaos. Story 15. This didn't happen to me, but to someone I know. A wife became suspicious that her husband, who was also the father of their child, might be having an affair. She hired a private investigator to find out for sure. The PI looked into it, but couldn't find any solid evidence. The husband traveled a lot for work, driving, flying, etc., and always with his sales partner. They even shared hotel rooms, but there was no clear trail to follow if he was having an affair. Years later, she hired the same PI again, confident the outcome would be different. But again, no obvious affair turned up. Then it hit her. He wasn't having an affair with another woman. It was with his sales partner. When confronted with the evidence, he admitted it. It took her years to come to terms with it, and she's still processing everything. Story 16. When I was a kid, my father was bucked off a horse and came dangerously close to dying. The impact was so intense, he did a complete somersault in midair. When he hit the ground, he broke 4 vertebrae, his collarbone, 3 ribs, and ruptured his spleen. We had just bought the horse a week earlier from a ranch in another state. During our visit, the horse was calm and gentle. But once we got it home, its behavior completely changed. It became much more aggressive. The ranch told us the previous owner was an 80-year-old woman who sold the horse because it had grown too big for her to ride. Naturally, we were suspicious. How could such a calm horse turn so erratic so quickly? We decided to hire a private investigator to find out the truth. It turned out the ranch had been heavily sedating the horse, which had already been through at least 3 previous owners. The little old lady they mentioned wasn't the owner at all. She was a man who had been killed in a knife fight at a bar. The ranch had drugged a horse with a history of unpredictable behavior just to get rid of it, and as a result, it nearly killed my dad. It was a miracle he wasn't paralyzed from the injuries. To this day, his back still hurts every day. His lungs were so damaged from blood filling them that about a third of his lung capacity was replaced by scar tissue. He's overweight and diabetic now because his body can't handle much physical activity. He used to be a runner, but that's impossible now due to the pain. The real kicker? Despite having rock-solid proof of the ranch's negligence, he chose not to sue. He knew the stress of a lawsuit would be unbearable, so he let them get away with it. Story 17. My ex-boss met a woman on a website called something like Sugar Babies. This woman was in her 20s while he was in his mid-50s. But don't worry, folks, neither of them were really into the sugar daddy thing. They both just made profiles for fun. The woman was purportedly living in her parents' home in North Carolina, going to school to be a nurse while her parents raised her daughter in Florida, so she could concentrate on school. I suppose there was some truth in that, as the ex-boss flew with her to Florida and met the parents and the child. He also flew to see her and flew her to his home a number of times. Eventually, he flew both her and her kid to our backward rural Texas small town and took them house shopping. A couple of weeks later, when he'd bought her yet another plane ticket to visit him, but she never showed up. At that point, he hired an online PI to investigate her. He found a number of profiles across the internet using her picture. Several purported differing names, and on 2 of them she'd posted about pending marriages to 2 other guys. She called him up the next day and claimed she missed the plane due to her car breaking down. She wanted him to loan her several $1,000s to repair it. He declined. Story 18. In 2007, my brother hired a PI because he was at his wit's end. He travels a lot for work, so he's not home much, and his wife, let's call her Hannah, wasn't very tech-savvy. Their daughter helped her set up Skype so they could talk every night over webcam, but after a month, the calls started getting fewer and fewer. At first, it was every other day, but soon enough, it was lucky if he got to talk to her once a week. Every time he asked her about it, she'd give him some excuse like, "I'm tired." He was really upset, and I didn't feel like I could offer much help over the phone. He couldn't just fly home to figure things out, though. He needed the money for his daughter's medical bills. She was hit by a car when she was 6 and had to undergo brain surgery. So, I decided to take matters into my own hands and went over to his house to check on Hannah and their daughter, Haley. I showed up around 11 p.m. after work. Haley let me in, and I headed to the kitchen, where I found Hannah talking to a man. Turns out, he was just her boss, and everything seemed fine. He even had a wedding ring on. I called my brother the next day while I was at the airport. I was headed out to see my partner's family, so I couldn't do much at that point. He told me that Hannah's boss was actually a woman. That's when I knew something wasn't right, so I fronted him some money and told him to hire a PI. I gave him the number of Gary, a PI my friend recommended. Gary was the real deal. He'd been a PI for 8 years, a former detective, a bodybuilder, a Marine, and basically a badass. Gary wasn't cheap, but my friend managed to convince him to take payments instead of the full amount up front. After a few days, my brother got a call from Gary. Gary had pictures of Hannah going into a motel with a man. My brother booked a flight home right away. Turns out, Hannah had been sleeping with nearly every guy in her office. They ended up getting a divorce, and she got custody of Haley. On top of all the medical bills, being out of a job, and everything else, my brother was in a rough spot. I wasn't exactly swimming in cash at the time, but I told him I'd help pay off Gary's fees since he was still working on the case. The next day, I went to see Gary to pay for the rest of what my brother owed. My wife wasn't happy about the cost, but I reassured her that we could handle it. This was my brother, and I couldn't just leave him hanging. When I met with Gary, he mentioned that my brother hadn't been keeping up with his payments, so I asked him, "What do you need?" He said, "I need about $350." That's when it hit me. Gary was actually 7 stories tall and a crustacean from the Paleozoic era. Eventually, after 2 years of collecting evidence, my brother got custody of Haley. He's a great father, and even after everything, he came out on top. TLDR, don't get a job where you need to travel, and please watch your kids when they're outside. Story 19. I wasn't personally involved in the story I'm about to share, but I live in a small town, and rumors spread fast. It's a tiny place, a couple of hundred people at most. Everyone knows everyone. We had town-wide BBQs regularly, and for the most part, it was a nice, close-knit community. One day, a woman and her 15-year-old son moved in. He was my age at the time. The woman didn't have much of a backstory. She was a lawyer and often spoiled her son. But here's the weird part. The kid wasn't a brat. He never acted spoiled. He was just creepy. He had paper-thin skin, was quieter than a mute, and dressed in goth-style clothes. Whenever you passed him, his headphones were blasting heavy metal. I was friends with the mayor's kid, and he told me that his dad had hired a private investigator to dig into the kid's past. Turns out, the kid was crazy good at throwing knives. His father was a magician who had been murdered by a gang. He used to perform street tricks and pickpocket people for a local gang, but when he decided he wanted out and asked for the money they owed him, they refused. So he stole it and skipped town, starting a new career as a magician. He even convinced his ex-wife to let him have visitation rights with his son. Within a year of that, the magician was dead. The publicity around him likely attracted unwanted attention, and the gang made sure he wouldn't be coming back. The kid was understandably messed up by it, and eventually convinced his mom to move out of state. My friend kept me updated on the PI's findings. A week after he was hired, the investigator turned up dead, found in a sewer. After months of investigation, they never found the killer. But honestly, I've got my suspicions. I still think that kid did it. It's a pretty messed up story, and I tell it every time I'm at the bar. Story 20. Growing up, I had a friend named Jason, and his mom was a private investigator. She was the epitome of the mom jeans type, driving a station wagon with fake wood paneling. At the time, I thought being a PI must be an amazing job, but it seemed like it was very unpredictable in terms of income and hours. Her 2 main regular clients were a local law firm that handled a lot of divorce cases and an insurance company that hired her when they suspected people were faking disability claims for homeowners or mobile home insurance. For example, someone might claim they slipped on the ice and now can't work because of back pain, until she followed them around for a few days and caught them playing beer league softball or water skiing. Jason's mom actually had a background in accounting, so the law firm would refer her to clients involved in divorces, custody, and alimony disputes, especially if they suspected money was being hidden or if someone needed a PI recommendation. I have no idea how much she charged for her services. Aside from that, most of her other cases involved marital infidelity or gathering evidence for divorce and custody battles. A lot of times, spouses already knew there was cheating, but what they really wanted was proof and the identity of the other person involved. Some of the saddest cases I remember were the ones where she was trying to gather evidence of abuse, like when a father had visitation every other weekend, and she was tasked with proving the mother was using heroin. I don't remember many specific cases, but I do recall that she was pretty tech-savvy for the time. She'd use Gopher and Telnet on a 2400 baud modem to search tax records and other databases. Looking back, it's crazy to think about how much information she could access online back then. If she knew someone's social security number, she could usually pull up their state tax returns. She could also find records of the interest paid on investments reported by employers and financial institutions to the state. I remember her being really proud of her ability to get that kind of information. Now, I wonder if she was actually a hacker. At the time, though, it was just cool that I could go to Jason's house after school, get on the modem, and dial into BBSs. One of her more impressive finds was for a female client whose ex-husband was hiding over $150,000 a year in income from his construction business. He He was stashing it in secret accounts, committing tax fraud, and underreporting his earnings to the state. This information was crucial in the divorce because it led to the proper adjustment of alimony payments, which are often based on income discrepancies. Story 21. After my father divorced my mother, he hired a private investigator to prove that my mother was living with her boyfriend, which would violate their alimony agreement and cause her monthly payments to stop. Not the child support, just the alimony according to state laws and the divorce terms. My mother denied it, but the boyfriend was definitely living in our house. My dad asked me and my brother, and we confirmed that he was there every night and morning, and that he had his mail sent to our address. At the time, I was 12, but I didn't find out about the investigation until I was 16 or 17. My mother had broken up with the boyfriend, claiming the age difference was too much. She was about 15 years older than him. But it turned out the real reason was that my dad confronted her with the tapes, and she knew she'd lose her alimony payments. She had just started a new commission-based job and wasn't making much money, so she depended on the alimony for her lifestyle. I did see the tapes, and while they weren't dramatic or exciting, it was odd to realize my brother and I were being followed everywhere, even with pictures being taken through the windows of our home. Now I understand why my dad did it. My mother was incredibly selfish and manipulative. There's much more to this story, but I'll spare you the details unless you want to hear about more of her craziness over the years. The saddest part is that my mother, even after more than 20 years of divorce, has never lived with another man because she doesn't want to lose the alimony. She has lifetime alimony in the divorce agreement. It's hard to believe she would choose money over a healthy relationship. Then again, she once told me she would never settle down until she found a rich man who could give her the lifestyle she wanted. No work, a big house, travel, etc. So, I guess my dad is the one who keeps her comfortable until she meets this rich man. Story 22. A guy on workers' comp from a $75,000 per year job gets another $75,000 per year job and is also cheating on his wife. I basically ruined his life, but honestly, he deserved it. I'm a private investigator, and aside from a few violent incidents, this is one of my best stories. The case I was assigned involved a man claiming to be completely disabled, unable to work due to an injury. I spent 2 full days, from 6 a.m. to 4 p.m., tracking him but never saw him once. I was given additional hours, so I scheduled earlier starts at 5 a.m. Finally, I caught a break. This guy was leaving at 5:45 a.m. for work and returning home around 5:30 p.m. Now, this wasn't anything unusual. Plenty of people try to game the system, but usually it's folks who are struggling to make ends meet. Not this guy, though. He was a master electrician who had transitioned to project management, earning over $75,000 a year. He had moved to a new company, doing the same job, and probably making almost the same salary. The kicker? His new job was only 15 minutes away, compared to his old one, which was over an hour's drive, even without traffic. Here comes the interesting part. I got another 30 hours on the case, and went back out. Same thing, he leaves early, heads to work. But then, at noon, he drives an hour to the city and goes to the hospital for an independent medical exam, IME, which I knew about, so no surprise there. Afterward, though, things took an unexpected turn. He drives over to the neighborhood of his old job. Odd, but not entirely out of the ordinary. Maybe he was going to catch up with some old colleagues. But no, he meets up with a woman, not his wife, and they go to lunch. Now, I know what you're thinking, but this wasn't exactly damning on its own. I grab lunch at the bar across the street, covert camera in hand, just in case. They're having some wine, and after finishing up, I head back to my car. 45 minutes later, they leave the restaurant, walk to her car, and that's when things really go downhill. They both get in the back seat and start hooking up. After a quick scare, when someone parks next to them mid-encounter, they move to the back of his truck to finish what they started. At that point, the rest of the day was uneventful, so I closed the case. Shame it never went to trial, but I heard his face during the conference later that month was priceless. I do feel bad for his wife, though. From what I heard, she was there when they showed the surveillance footage. The guy lost the money he was collecting on workers' comp and is now in the middle of a divorce. Story 23. Flashback to a few years ago. Nothing crazy, not some high-stakes mission, no car chases, just a wild ride into the world of elderly scams. At the time, my great-uncle was 97. A little forgetful, sure, but still sharp as a tack. He was a deeply religious man, went to church every week without fail. That's where he met a couple of older women who took a liking to him. They'd give him rides, check in on him, bring him to church. All seemed well. Then I heard they'd asked him to sign over power of attorney. That was weird. My uncle and I weren't close, but he knew my brother and I were his only heirs. Wouldn't he have at least mentioned something? I was a little skeptical, but I brushed it off. What was I supposed to do? He was a grown man, and we lived on opposite sides of the world. Fast forward 2 years. I get a call from the DMV. My uncle is 97 by now, so of course, my heart stops for a second. I was waiting for the call telling me he had passed. But no, not yet. Instead, it was the church ladies again. Turns out they were trying again to get him to sign over power of attorney, and someone at the DMV got suspicious. That's when I knew something was up. I get in touch with a private investigator from my area. The guy barely lets me finish before he goes, "Wait, let me tell you how this story goes." Then he lays it all out. This is a known scam. These old ladies show up at church, befriend old men with money, and play the long game. They get close, pretend to be helpful, and then manipulate their target into handing over his savings. From there, all they have to do is outlive him, and boom, free cash. I jump on a plane and get to my uncle's place. Sure enough, they'd been pressuring him relentlessly. But my uncle, God bless his stubbornness, had held off just long enough. He always said no meant no, and unlike most people, when he said it, he meant it. Now here's the kicker. These women had already convinced him to sign over all of his retirement accounts to them. They hadn't straight up stolen from him. They'd just borrowed the money. A very fine distinction. But with the help of the ex-SEAL, gun-in-holster, knife-in-boot private investigator I hired, we were able to unravel the mess and get my uncle's money back where it belonged. Turns out, I didn't even have to follow through with turning them in. Once we started reversing their scam, their whole operation started unraveling. The trooper who had been in on it, fired for misconduct. The younger of the 2 women had managed to wrap my uncle around her finger, hook, line, and sinker, and apparently planned to outlive him and collect it all. But my family doesn't roll over easily. My uncle was the definition of stubborn, and that trait runs strong in all of us. In the end, after 3 years of legal battles, my parents' marriage fell apart, the money was returned, and the 2 women disappeared from our lives. I chose not to press charges, they were old, and I figured karma would sort itself out eventually. More importantly, I learned a lot from that private investigator, a grizzled Vietnam vet, former SEAL, who carried a gun in his shoulder holster and a knife in his boot. The man was a legend. The biggest lesson, though? If you even suspect someone is taking advantage of a vulnerable person in your life, step in immediately. Don't second-guess yourself. Don't wait for proof. Act. Kick ass, take names, and protect the people who can't protect themselves. You might be the only one who will. Oh, and my uncle? He lived to 99. Outlasted those 2 crooks. Out of pure, unshakable family stubbornness. The stress of the whole thing probably contributed to my parents' divorce. But at least in the end, we got everything signed back over. And yeah, this whole mess was one of the most interesting experiences of my life. Story 24. About 10 years ago, my cousin was deployed in Afghanistan on his 2nd tour. During phone calls back home, his daughter made mention of an uncle he knew didn't exist. My aunt decided to hire a private investigator for him and found out that his wife was cheating with a doctor. Of course, he was heartbroken. The divorce that followed was quick. However, there is a bright side to this. After switching to a reserve unit, he was able to finish college and go to law school. His ex-wife? She was dumped by the doctor not long after the divorce. She attempted to reconcile, but my cousin refused. He's remarried. She lives with a group of friends in some rundown house. Story 25. My grandfather, who owns a large vineyard, was once falsely accused by 2 former workers who claimed they had injured their backs on the job and demanded he cover their medical bills and disability. Something about their story didn't sit right with him, so he hired a private investigator to look into it. Turns out, his instincts were spot on. The PI discovered that both men were perfectly fine and had been working elsewhere the whole time, at physically demanding jobs that required heavy lifting. Armed with the evidence, my grandfather was able to expose their scam and avoid paying a dime. Safe to say, that little scheme backfired on them in the end. Story 26. My uncle worked as a private investigator for a while mainly handling cases for insurance companies and lawyers. A lot of his work involved sorting out fraud, like tracking down whether someone was actually injured or if they were trying to pull a fast one. He once had a case where a guy wrecked his Ferrari and filed an insurance claim, insisting it was just an unfortunate accident. Well, my uncle did some digging, and sure enough, the guy had posted a video online basically admitting that he crashed the car on purpose. Turns out, he was mad at his parents for getting him the wrong Ferrari and thought wrecking it would make them buy the one he really wanted. The whole thing was straight out of Parks and Rec, full Tom Haverford energy. Safe to say, that little scheme didn't work out so well for him. Story 27. I've never hired a private investigator, but my now father-in-law did when I first started dating his daughter. The funny part is, at the time, I was working at the port, with the ships. One day, I stopped at the guard shack and mentioned that I thought I was being followed by some strange person. Sure enough, the private investigator pulled up right behind me, and before I knew it, 3 port police officers were on him, guns drawn, telling him to get out of the car. I think he ended up getting arrested. I couldn't help but laugh, but at the same time, I did feel a little bad for the guy. He definitely wasn't expecting that. Story 28. This isn't my story, but it's about a friend of mine. About 20 years ago, his brother passed away, and the police ruled it saying he offed himself. However, neither my friend nor his parents believed that the brother would have taken that step. So, they decided to hire a private investigator to look into the brother's girlfriend. They were suspicious because shortly after his death, she suddenly moved away and cut off all contact with the family, even skipping the funeral. The investigator dug into her past and found a lot of questionable behavior. She'd been involved in various scams, and curiously, her previous boyfriend had also passed under similar circumstances, ruled as a case of offing himself. At that point, the investigator warned the family that if they chose to keep digging, they could uncover things that might haunt them forever, as other cases had turned into obsessions that never brought peace. My friend was eager to continue, but his parents felt it was too much for them and ultimately decided to stop the investigation. Story 29. During my first year of college, a friend of mine had a private investigator follow him around for an entire semester. His dad was concerned because his grades had dropped, so he hired the PI to figure out what was going on. The thing is, my friend was still doing really well. He just went from straight A's to mostly B's and B+S. Anyway, our big group of friends became the PI's prime focus whenever he was around. This was a lot since we all lived in the same dorm, and our parents were all friends too. The PI basically ended up just observing us smoking weed, drinking, and doing other typical college activities. But in the end, his dad was cool about it and didn't rat us out to our parents after everyone found out. Story 30. Not hired by me, but on me. I was SA'd when I was 18 and 2 private investigators were contracted by the A-holes defense team to investigate, dig up dirt, and, in my opinion, intimidate me. They followed me around for about a week, then showed up at my house unannounced to discuss the findings. I came home from school, and they were on my front porch. I thought they were selling Bibles or something. Lucky for me, my stepfather had taken off work that day, so he scared them off with a baseball bat before they could investigate me any further. I found out later that they followed me to school, observed me skipping. Really, I left during a study hall that was right before my lunch period, but apparently that was evidence of something. But mainly they interviewed my peers and ex-boyfriends to see what kind of lifestyle I led, and what I was into physical intimacy-wise. The a-hole's defense was that I was into older men and had asked him to rough me up. What they found was that I was a pretty normal 18-year-old girl who smoked occasionally and was into perfectly vanilla intimate life with a respectably low number of other boys. Stellar investigating. Story 31. In 2005, my mom started suspecting that my dad was cheating on her whenever he went to the Dominican Republic. So, she hired a private investigator there to keep an eye on him. The investigator sent her photos of my dad with a young woman, kissing, dancing, going into hotel rooms, you name it. It turned out that the woman was the mother of my father's illegitimate daughter, my half-sister. Edit, my dad got her a visa, and now she's living with us in the States. Story 32. My husband's ex-wife has shared custody of their 2 children. This is in the UK. He was trying for full custody due to her declining mental health and alcohol abuse. One day, he went to pick them up, and they were gone. Every time he found them and filed for a court order for visitation, she would just move. In the past 8 years, she's had 17 different addresses, including a tent in a field. A couple of times, the courts have informed her family that they have a legal obligation to provide her details, but they insist they have no contact with her. Since they live in a small village near my in-laws, I believe them. Someone would have noticed if she was around. The last private investigator found them in a rented flat up north, just a few weeks after they were evicted. I've written letters to every school admissions department in England and Wales, and at this point, I don't believe the children are even in school anymore. The last school report we received showed very poor attendance, with them maybe going in 2 days a week. As they moved out of that county, the Children Missing Education Department wouldn't have followed up on it. In the end, it wasn't really worth it for us because the investigator didn't uncover anything we didn't already know. Our goal was to get a current address, and instead of going through court, use the local child contact center. They help with reintroductions after long separations and also keep the adults apart during the process. But at this point, we're just waiting for the children to turn 18. Story 33. I worked as a personal detective and once had to travel to Colombia to rescue a teenage girl from her extremely controlling and overly religious father. I didn't have all the details about the case at first, but I followed my instincts. The father was suffocating her, stripping away her sense of freedom and autonomy. She had no control over anything in her life. I also suspect he had cut off her pinky as a form of punishment. Honestly, it was a messed up situation. And for the record, I have a strong dislike for lighthouses after that case. Story 34. I worked as an assistant to a PI for a while, and it was a pretty interesting experience. He called me his girl Friday, which I thought was fun. Most of his work was for defense attorneys, so there were moments when it felt a little strange working for the bad guys. But of course, not everyone was bad, and they needed someone to help prove their innocence, so that part was rewarding. I did a lot of process serving, which was nothing like what you see in movies like Pineapple Express. Most people were totally fine with it, and if anything, they were expecting it. Only once in a while did someone get upset. When he took on private cases, they were usually pretty uneventful. The only time he found someone cheating on their spouse was in a rare case, and even then, it was a pretty low-key discovery. He only took a handful of cases like that each year. Story 35. I was trying to track down a former business associate who had failed to return some of my property. The PI I hired quickly discovered that she had been using multiple names and birth dates, sometimes claiming to be a senior citizen, and had racked up around 20 different addresses across the country over the past few years. The PI was just as confused as I was and said she was either a con artist or mentally ill, maybe even both. Anyway, the luck turned in my favor when her new employer issued a press release about her hiring. Instead of reaching out to her directly, which I had already done, including exchanging some fruitless emails, I decided to contact her new boss. 2 days later, the UPS man showed up at my door with my property. Story 36. A few years ago, my mom passed away, leaving my 16-year-old sister without anyone to look after her. At the time, I was living in Florida, so I had to make the trip back to Detroit. My Aunt C tried to get custody of my sister, but we suspect it was because she was after the state money again. My sister had been fostered by her before, but it hadn't gone well. When I arrived in Detroit, my other Aunt J picked me up. On the way to the family estate, I noticed a black Crown Victoria with tinted windows a few cars behind us. Why do PIs always drive cars that look like cop cars? We stopped for lunch, and I saw the same car parked across the way in the grocery store lot. Not exactly the most subtle move. Sure enough, when we left, it was still trailing us, now 4 cars behind. Growing up in downtown Detroit, I knew the area pretty well, and most of my childhood friends are still on the block. So we decided to take a drive down my old street. Suddenly, the Crown Victoria was surrounded by a few cars, and some rather large gentlemen got out and decided to have a little chat with the guy inside about what he was doing in their neighborhood. Let's just say that was one neighborhood watch program I could get behind. The PI didn't seem to have the best day, and I only knew he was a PI because the local police came to our estate asking my aunt and me what had happened. But hey, not my fault he chose to go into a tough neighborhood and upset the locals. My aunt was just showing me, someone from Florida, around some of the older parts of town. We all knew Aunt C hired a PI to dig up some dirt, but unfortunately for the guy, some people have connections in low places. As for my sister, she's doing great. She ended up living with some close friends, keeps in touch regularly with the family, graduated high school, and even got some scholarship offers for softball. Story 37. I went through 3 private investigators trying to track down the con man who swindled me out of my car. None of them found much, and they all eventually gave up on the case. In a way, I'm grateful they did, because at least they didn't milk me for every last cent. However, about a year ago, someone from Reddit was able to help me when I posted about it. Her husband had access to some powerful law enforcement tools, but that's all he could reveal about himself over the phone. Still, he was able to provide me with past addresses and multiple social security numbers the guy had used, confirming that he was a con man who had been operating all over the country. Story 38. When my best friend from high school's parents were going through a divorce, his father was convinced his mother was cheating on him. She was rarely home, and his credit card statements were loaded with gas charges, suggesting she'd been driving all over the place. So, he hired a private investigator to track her movements. Turns out, she wasn't cheating. She had actually converted to Jehovah's Witnesses and was too afraid to tell him directly. She was hoping to eventually convert him. But when he found out she had joined what he considered a cult, he filed for divorce. Story 39. When I was 15, I discovered my dad was cheating on my mom. I went through his browser history, cracked his email, IM, and even his adultfriendfinder.com account. I set up a fake account on AFF, and 5 hours later, he responded, trying to arrange a meeting at a hotel. I didn't tell my mom at the time because I was young and didn't know how to handle it, and waited about 6 months before I finally did. She didn't believe me. Fast forward 3 years. My mom hires a private investigator and finds out my dad had been hooking up with a woman in a nearby city. She sent letters to her husband and their neighbors. But despite all of this, she forgave him, and they're still together. Story 40. The driver who hit me not only veered off the road, where I was legally riding my quad, but was also talking on her cell phone, looking into the passenger seat, driving without insurance, and operating a vehicle on a revoked license due to prior accident-related convictions. Her truck struck my quad in a T-bone position, pushing us forward as it plowed through dirt for 70 feet before finally coming to a stop. An investigation later confirmed she had been driving 35 miles per hour in a 25 miles per hour zone and hadn't braked after impact. After the crash, she attempted to flee, but witnesses caught and detained her. My friend and I, both 14 years old, were transported by ambulance, and I never even saw the woman's face. Despite the clear evidence that the crash occurred off the roadway, the responding trooper wrote in his report that I, at 14, had pulled an RV, instead of an ATV, in front of the driver. While I lay on the ground in shock, waiting for medical help, he repeatedly asked if I had consumed any alcohol or illegal substances, rephrasing the question multiple times. My neighbors had to intervene, asking him to wait until my parents arrived. Even in the hospital, before I had received pain medication, and while my neck was still being evaluated, he continued questioning me until a nurse finally asked him to stop. Despite 2 eyewitnesses testifying against the woman, both to the trooper and later in court, the accident was still deemed my fault. The DMV informed me that I would have to pay for the damages to her truck before I could obtain a driver's license, and once I did, I was required to carry SR-22 insurance for 5 years. During the investigation, it was uncovered that the trooper who handled my case personally knew the woman who hit me and was possibly a family friend. In the months between the accident and the investigation's conclusion, I struggled with overwhelming guilt, believing I was to blame, especially since I had no memory of the accident. My friend suffered a severe leg injury that required multiple surgeries over the next 5 years. She had been visiting from Texas at the time and had to be medevaced back home, placing a massive financial burden on her family. During that time, I fell into such a deep, dark place. My parents pursued the case all the way to the state Supreme Court over the course of 3 years. When we finally went to trial, the judge ruled that the only way to clear my record and remove the financial obligations was if the trooper retracted his statement. However, by then, we learned he had already been dismissed from the force for misconduct, making his testimony worthless. It was a costly lesson in corruption. The financial strain from the case played a significant role in my parents' divorce. But if we hadn't hired an investigator, we might have spent the rest of our lives believing I was at fault. Knowing the truth, despite everything, is something I'm incredibly grateful for. Story 41. As a private investigator in Colorado, I can confirm that hiring a PI can be expensive. I primarily work as an investigator for criminal defense attorneys, handling cases ranging from small matters to murder investigations, including some pretty wild cases. These cases are typically funded by the state, and they pay the least, around $36 to $41 per hour. For private pay cases with attorneys I work with, I charge $50 to $65 per hour, depending on the attorney. For clients off the street, especially those seeking surveillance for things like cheating, I charge $75 per hour. Additionally, I charge for mileage and travel time. As for the job itself, it can be both boring and exciting. Surveillance can be pretty dull if nothing's happening, but when you actually catch someone in the act, it feels like you're a spy and it can be thrilling. Criminal cases can also be interesting, though as a defense investigator, I sometimes struggle with justifying working on certain cases. I've had to assist in defending people charged with serious crimes, and despite the challenges, the work is usually engaging, and no two cases are ever the same. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.